Today, we're going to talk about the venerable and ubiquitous BEC. So before we get started, let me know in the comments, do you know what it stands for and why it stands for that? Today's topic with our continued electronics basics series is the BEC. Now, you probably know at this point what a BEC is or what it stands for, but I'm going to tell you all the little details. A BEC, even right here, directly on it, the BEC stands for battery eliminating circuitry. But we still use a battery in our rigs, particularly in RC crawlers, but practically everything these days uses a battery. So why do they call it battery eliminating circuitry if we're still using a battery? It's kind of a long story, uphill both ways. Back in my day, we had actually a battery that would power our radio. And this was probably from the old days, the really old days, was, really the RC market started as airplanes. And the airplanes always had a gasoline engine because back in my day, we simply didn't have the energy density to have an electric powered plane. It just wasn't out there until Bob Astro created his ridiculous huge plane with this huge wingspan and solar cells and, it's 36 cell nickel metal hydride or NiCad at the time, if you were going to have some sort of plane, but you still had to power your radio. And radios, especially back in the old days, they didn't like more than 6 volts. So you would have a 4-cell NiCad or even nickel metal hydride in later years, and that was what powered your radio. So you had your main pack that would maybe electronics if you had an electric sort of vehicle, but you also had your little 4-cell receiver pack, and that's what they were called, RX pack, receiver packs. And so what the BEC circuit originally did was it got rid of the little RX pack. And it's not something that we really see these days. If you have a nitro vehicle or a gas vehicle, you still actually do have a battery that powers your radio. But instead of using a 4-cell pack, a lot of these will run on 2-cell LiPo direct these days. You can have 8.4 volts going into your radio. It's pretty standard, not all the way around, but it's pretty standard that the newer radios will support 2-cell LiPo direct. And if they don't do that, then they will support 7.4 volt direct. And what you can do, at least these days, is use your battery eliminating circuitry to essentially choke down that voltage. And you could use like a 3-cell pack. This guy is good for up to 6-cell input, 25.2 volt input. So you could have, a 4-cell, 5-cell, 6-cell lithium polymer pack. You use this to knock it down to whatever your radio will take on voltage, and all is well in the world. So why are we still using them today if even our ESCs also have BECs built into them? I'm glad that you asked. So servos have gotten extremely powerful over the years. And although all the ESCs, let's talk about the ground market for a while, even in the air market, all these radio or all these speed controllers that you would have, they have these integrated BEC circuits. So you don't have to have a separate RX pack. So you have your main battery, it plugs into your speed controller actually powers your radio and hence also all of your servos at the exact same time. But even in the airplane days, it got to a point to where the servos were just simply too powerful for these little bitty BECs on the inside because we started with a linear BEC. This was the original type of battery eliminating circuitry. It was linear. It was literally a voltage divider. It was a resistive bridge where you would have your voltage is coming in, let's say up here, and then you have a tap coming off of it. You have another resistor down here. Tap coming off of your middle resistor is a voltage dividing circuit. Depending on how much you're knocking the voltage down, the more that you knock it down, the more inefficient it is. The amperage that your servo is drawing is the same amperage that your resistors have to take. So if you have, let's just say for sake of argument, a 10 volt pack and you're doing 5 amps, then that is going to end up being 50 watts. 50 watts of essentially bleeding heat that upper resistor is going to have to pass. Even the lower resistor is going to have to pass at least all the amperage. It won't have quite as much voltage on it. So the wattage loss on your lower resistor isn't going to be, but that upper resistor has to take all of the power. All the power. As you can probably assume, not very efficient. The old days, back in my day. Oh man, it's probably been 10 years ago? Let me know in the comments if you remember when these guys came out. These changed the market. They are still an industry standard today even. And what these allowed was a much wider voltage input. Because it's digital, these are called digital BECs, or switch mode BECs is commonly to run much cooler, so they could be smaller for the same wattage. So this guy, it is 10 amps out peak. It depends on what your input voltage is. It doesn't work as efficiently with all input voltages, but still far more efficiently than a linear BEC. And this allowed us to have these teeny little guys. They're so tiny, cute. And they essentially use the magic of PWM, of duty cycle, a term that you've been hearing more and more in my last videos, and it knocks the voltage down. It doesn't actually output a lower voltage, but through the magic of MOSFETs and inductors, yeah, they essentially knock down the voltage. If you had, let's say, 10 volts in and 5 volts out, that would be 50% duty cycle to get there. And when we have amperage and the inductors, it kind of screws with that. So when you have a higher load, the PWM of this has to be able to adjust to it. So they are slightly smart devices. They have to be able to watch that output voltage. And as the output voltage starts to drop, then the PWM has to increase to make sure that our output voltage is nice and stable. And then when that load is reduced, then the PWM has to jump down really quick so that our voltage doesn't spike through the magic of inductance. They switch extremely fast, and honestly, we're really lucky to have these in our lives today, especially on the hobby realm. The hobby realm has gotten so sophisticated, absolutely so sophisticated in the last 2 decades in particular, since about 2002 when lithium polymer batteries came out, and the electrics, the electronic components that we have, they've kept up. It's been really awesome. I'm super thankful to be able to watch this, to be able to have devices like this in general. Here it is, the BEC, and our body reamer right here as well. So let's see, what else? I would also like to talk about, at least for the rock crawling industry, why these are falling out of favor before we end this today. So because of the SHV, because of the super high voltage servos that I came up with, whatever it's been 4 or 5 years ago, yes, we don't actually need really powerful BECs anymore. So if I was gonna have an 800 ounce inch servo that is decently efficient, I'm gonna need about 10 to 12 amps at that lower voltage at 7.4 volts to support that. But if it's running directly off the battery, let's just say we double our voltage, then we can have our current, and it's also not going to be running through our radio. So let me just grab one. I'm sure I've got one around here somewhere. Here we go. The dual wire setup. This would be our radio signal. It actually isn't passing any current, and then we would have this plugged in directly to our battery. So none of the current is actually going through our receiver at this point. Therefore, you only need enough current from your BEC coming out of your ESC. Love all these little acronyms, right? You only need enough current to boot up your radio at that point, and that may be 1/4 of an amp tops, not really much, maybe 0.1 amps. So as long as this can boot up your radio, then you can power your server directly without needing a powerful internal BEC or external BEC, and it has made BECs fall out of favor, at least in the rock crawling world. Maybe we'll see this transfer into other segments. Maybe we will see 3S or 4S or 6S capable servos in the air industry. Who knows? Who knows where it's going to go? But because of this ability to run on higher voltages now with our servos, these aren't necessarily needed these days, which is kind of cool. Honestly, we can get rid of one component. We can have relatively cheap, low power internal BECs on our ESCs, and all is well in the world. But for the average person running normal old equipment, you still need to know what a BEC is. I hope this helped out as far as telling you what it does. If you would like to see a deep dive into the components of the BEC, then we can do that. Actually, I would like to kind of go through and show you the circuitry that BECs are, why they're really cool, and why these low-cost BECs from Castle are still just amazing little devices. So if you do have any comments, if you do have any questions that I didn't get to, post them down below. I'll do my best to get to them. As always, thanks for tuning in. Have a great day.